Well, welcome everybody again. I am so excited to have an entire captive audience of people to nerd out about botany with, because as anybody who's ever gone on a hike with me knows, that's all I want to do all the time, basically. And I hike very slowly as a result. My talk is called Green Borer, How to See Plants, and that is because it's been expressed to me by a few different people that when you have, until you have a certain amount of knowledge about plants and their forms, they can all kind of look like a green borer. You don't really know how to differentiate what you're looking at, and I really wanted to try to impart some knowledge about how to break down the forms and the colors and the textures that you're seeing into knowledge that you can use to differentiate what plant you're looking at and information about that plant. So, I kind of just said that, I guess, but yeah, so the different plant structures and tissues that you may be looking at, and patterns in their form, where they branch, what kind of general shape they have, and how to connect the dots and figure out what plant you're looking at. And I'm taking for granted that you want to know that. So the general things that you might want to have if you are going down the botany route are, I have a couple hand lenses here, also known as a loupe. Jewelers use them, and they're very useful for looking at the very small structures that plants have, especially the flowers, and a dichotomous key, which is a giant book that just has a series of ever-narrowing two-part questions that are kind of mutually exclusive conditions. So it'll be like, the plant has leaves or doesn't have leaves, and then if it has leaves, you proceed this way. If it doesn't have leaves, you proceed the other way, and you gradually are able to narrow and narrow and narrow until you figure out exactly what you're looking at. And I have this is about what size they usually
carry
are.
that when you hike?
Yes. Incidentally, botany is a really good workout. And having a notebook is also really good, as I'll elaborate on later, and having tweezers is really useful because things be tiny. So plants can look like a lot of different things. So this is a plant. This is a liverwort, which is a non-vascular plant, which basically means it doesn't have specialized tissues for moving water through the plant, and it also doesn't have lignin and a few other different chemicals that, or not chemicals, I guess, compounds that enable plants to grow against gravity and get further than maybe 3 or so inches off the ground. So this basically has barely differentiated cells. It's all mostly the same kind of tissue, but it is a plant. And then you have stuff like this. Also a plant. Pretty heady, yeah.
Come on in.
So obviously there's quite a bit of diversity here. And yeah, so in order to figure out what am I looking at, you need to hone the skills of how to see, and that involves prior context and kind of comparing what you're looking at against what you've seen before. You have to have the inquisitiveness to be curious about it. You know, fascination helps. Suspicion is key, because you will get a pattern in your mind and you'll go, that's a flower. It'll be a trick. It won't be a flower. It will be 200 flowers pretending to be one flower. We'll get into that later. And
I want to see that.
Be suspicious of all plants.
yes, exactly.
That's one of the realest things I've ever heard. Yeah. Absolutely.
So we're looking for shapes, we're looking for textures, we're looking for patterns, and we're looking at color primarily. And one of the best things that you can do is to start a nature journal. You want to explore like a kid, and you want to draw what you're looking at, even if it's bad. It doesn't really matter what it looks like. What it matters is that you're training a discerning eye. So you're looking at something, and you're trying to reproduce it on paper. And through that process, as it goes in through your eyes and you try to bring it back out through your hand, you're going to start to notice stuff that you really wouldn't notice if you were just kind of like looking at it and going, cool, it's a leaf. So, I kind of got into the vascular versus non-vascular thing. That basically is a primary differentiation that happened millions of years ago, where tissues evolved that enabled plants to kind of resist gravity and go upward. And then we've got annual plants, which basically everything from here down has vascular tissue. Annual plants, the entire lifespan is in one season. And then, okay, yeah. annuals and biennials, they don't have any woody growth. Their full life cycle, basically they'll like be a seed, they'll come up in the spring, they will flower, they will produce seeds, and then they will die. And that whole thing happens in one growing season. Biennials, that happens in 2 growing seasons. And the vast majority of things that we eat are annuals. And then perennial plants, it's basically everything else. So it could be a shrub, it could be a tree, could be something like this guy, which I really like. That's a desert lily. And they have a bulb. So bulbs are also perennials. Just a little broad overview. And then another primary split in plants is basically things that are conifers and related to conifers and everything else. So it's basically things that flower and the things that don't flower. And that's a pretty basal split on the family tree of plants, and that also happened millions of years ago. And why I'm giving you guys this information is kind of a broad background so that when you're looking at a plant, you can kind of be looking for certain general traits and be able to immediately go, okay, there's an entire class of plants, I know it's not one of those, and just be able to kind of block those off immediately. So generally, gymnosperm, which means naked seed, those are in cones and, well, almost always cones. We don't have to get into that. And then angiosperms, they have basically fleshy coverings around the seeds, and those seeds develop from flowers. And as you would imagine, we really like to eat things that have fleshy coverings around seeds because that's what a fruit is. So lots of other animals like to eat fleshy covered seeds as well, and that's why there's been this huge amount of diversity of angiosperms, because animals like to eat them, and then they spread the seeds around, and then there are a lot more of them. So within the flowering plants, and I'm going to pass around some visual aids now, you can just kind of get these out and take a look at them. So
So these are angiosperms?
yeah, all of these are angiosperms.
Are you open to questions during
Yes.
your talk?
Absolutely. I'm going to be kind of like blitzing through a little bit, so please ask for clarification.
Is the called a dichotomous book? What was
Dichotomous key, yes.
Is there digital versions? Do those exist?
Yes, those do exist, and people are doing some really cool work with making interactive versions that you can basically, they have them on in app form as well,
Cool.
so you can just go through and look at your plant and just go, yes,
Oh,
that,
man, I
yes,
love
that,
That's
and then it
awesome.
just gives you what plant it is.
That sounds awesome.
Has
So-
anyone heard of the app Seek? Oh my god, have you heard of it?
No.
It's, you literally open up the app and you hold it up to any plant and it tells you what it is.
Wow.
TED Talk over.
It's cool. Check it out, I'm sorry.
So, monocot versus dicot, and basically what we're referring to is a structure called a cotyledon, and that is the very first leaf that comes out of a seed. And there are some plants, and it's one leaf that comes out, and there are some plants, and it's 2 leaves that come out. And that is basically how you can split the entirety of the angiosperm. And so monocots are like grasses, lilies, agaves, things that, you can pass these around, have linear veins in their leaves, and they're like parallel, they don't branch, they're non-branching veins in the leaves. So that's a really like an immediate clue that you can look at a leaf and it's just like parallel veins, no branching, probably a monocot.
These are vascular, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and their flower parts will be in multiples of 3. So basically, if it has 3, if it has 6 petals, then also a monocot. And dicots, basically everything else except conifers, they'll have branching leaf veins, and I have some, pass those around. You can just kind of look and see like, oh, there's a central leaf vein here, and then it branches out from there. And flower parts are almost always in multiples of 4 or 5. So, getting pretty specific already.
Are conifers in one of those 2 groups?
No, they are not angiosperms and they don't have
Oh.
flowers.
Yeah.
So yeah, they have cones.
Awesome.
Yeah. So this is just a cool little thing that I found on the limitless internet. And just illustrates all of those points really nicely. So we've got 6 petals up here, and we've got 5 down here, and just kind of a nice illustration of the differences in the two groups. And a nice little. It's not
So the
super
monocot is on the left. The
Yes.
Wow.
yeah,
Yeah.
was it bicot? Dicot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but which part's the leaf? It's not always obvious. So, in the ones that are being passed around that are the dipot, basically when you pull one of those out of there, if you want to just pull one out and
Alright, yeah.
hold it up, that entire thing is a leaf.
Oh shit! What?
Yeah.
So every second man.
Why?
Oh, slow down, Hagen.
Okay, before you explain, then can I ask, would this segment be the leaf?
No.
Okay. Alright, cool. Now clarify.
Yeah.
I'm ready for this.
So basically, plants really like to, I say like, this is personifying an inanimate thing, but it's fine, we'll go with it. So plants really like to come up with a structure and then just replicate it and just make more of it because it's successful, so we'll just make more of it. So basically, that is one leaf structure that has within it leaflets. And the really important thing that you should be looking for is basically where the structure attaches to the stem, there's going to be this little bud in like the armpit. And when you find the bud at the base, in that little armpit between the stem and the stem of the leaf, which is called the rachis, if you were wanting to know that, then you found the leaf. So that's what you can look for to make sure that what you're looking at is a leaf and not a leaflet.
If it has a bud, it's a leaf.
Yeah. Yeah, so basically you look in that armpit area, I'll stop saying armpit. You find the bud.
I like it. It's good. Armpit, keep the pin.
Yeah.
Never stop.
Never stop. So basically leaves are also a really important thing to look at in general because they can give you a pretty strong clue as to what plant family your plant is in. And I'm not gonna delve into that basically at all in this talk because you can go super deep on leaf shape. There are so many of them, and I'm not gonna be able to find that immediately. But this book has this is a glossary of plant terms, and it's illustrated, and there's an entire section on leaf shapes, and they have really great names, and they're really fun shapes. So basically, it's a really good clue as to what plant family you're looking at. Once you know what family plant is in, it makes it a lot easier to figure out what it is. So moving on to the parts of the flower, there are basically 4 key structures, and they're referred to as whorls because it's kind of theorized that the tissues of the flower differentiated over time through basically gene copying and genome duplication that resulted in having multiple copies of the same gene that made like parallel structures, and then one of those copies would get mutated, so that parallel structure would do something slightly different, and over time you result in like specialization of tissues. So basically the outermost of the structures is called the calyx, and it is the sepals. So if you think of like a rose bush, or basically you look at a bud and it's covered in green, and then that opens and the flower comes out, those are the sepals. The corolla is the layer that is the petals, and then the next one is the male parts, and then the one in the very center is the female parts. And this is specifically for flowers which are bisexual or perfect. That's the actual botanical term. And that means that they have both male and female reproductive parts. And that is the most common type of flower these days. But there are also flowers that are only male, there are flowers that are only female, and there are flowers that start male and become female. It's not as common to go the other direction, but it does exist. So,
Uh-oh.
My God.
Is it possible that it timed out even though?
it might have.
Yeah. Here we go.
Let's all go to the lobby.
We gotta keep going, okay?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
So, just a nice little graphic of a little cross section of a flower with those.
Before we
Yeah.
move on, so like you mentioned the bisexual flowers and the mutation that occurs during gene duplication.
Mhm.
So like since they are self-fertilizing themselves, how does diversity or like evolution like came up with so many like species of the flower? You know what I'm saying? Because
Yeah.
the diversity would be limited in that sense. Homozygosity would be a problem, right?
Yeah, it is possible for plants to fertilize themselves, but it doesn't actually happen that often. So basically, they have both of the parts because evolutionarily speaking, that's just a better bet because you don't have to rely on there being a male plant nearby to fertilize your ovules or whatever. So it's evolutionarily a better bet to have the capability to produce ovules and to fertilize ovules. So can you just like hold that thought and I can elaborate more after the talk because there's really interesting stuff there. But like,
Okay.
yeah. So there are exceptions to flower morphology, and so tepals are basically undifferentiated petals and sepals. It's the same structure for both of those whorls of the flower, and you see this a lot in comparatively like evolutionarily ancient lineages, like magnolias, for instance. So magnolias have a bunch of petals, and it's basically just a spiral of petals going up until you get to the structure where the seeds eventually form. And they're all tepals, so it's not like a bud enclosed by sepals. And then there are also plants that you look and you think you're looking at petals, and okay, so this was an example of tepals actually. So basically all irises and a lot of lilies, this is the case. So if you look really closely at this one, it looks like it's 6 petals, but there's actually 2 sets of 3, and it's kind of hard to see, but one set of 3 is actually inside of the other set of 3. And then from this angle, you can see that there's no like little green guys on the outside that would have been enclosing that. So that's kind of a good clue that what you're looking at is actually.
And does that look like it only has the female parts?
Actually, so this, if you see that yellow at the tip there, that's actually, let me go back. So these guys, their male parts, the anthers, are just really closely enclosed around the female part.
Okay.
Yeah. So dogwood is another really good example. This is Cornus natalii, which is our native dogwood. And these are actually not petals, these are bracts, which is basically a leaf pretending to be a petal.
What?
Yes. These are the reactions I want.
Suspicious confirmed.
This is why you have to be suspicious.
Yeah.
So these are all individual flowers in here. This is like 50 tiny flowers surrounded by big showy bracts. And so it's theorized that this evolved because the plant is like, okay, I can just have all of this floral structure in here. Any bee that lands on here is going to get covered in pollen. It's just all going to be over before it starts. And in order to get to the nectar, I'm just going to have the most gigantic flower ever. So it's just a mega flower. And similarly, we have composite flowers. So there's an entire family of plants. It's called the Asteraceae now. It used to be called Compositae, and that's because they are composite flowers. So what you're looking at here, this is a bunch of tiny flowers. So this is like daisies, sunflowers, artichokes also, lots of things. And they have 2 different kinds of flowers. They have disc flowers and they have ray flowers. And a disc flower is these little guys. So you can see there's 5 tiny little petals, and it's just this tube.
Cute.
And then the ray flower is 5 fused petals that makes 1 mega petal. So if you look back here, basically you have disc flowers in the center, and then you have a row around the outside of the ray flowers, and it makes a super mega floral structure.
My next trip is gonna be so good.
So I figured I would throw in a recap of this.
Nice.
Yes.
So we have gymnosperms versus angiosperms. So
I have a quick
forgot to
question
pass
about the
these around.
gymnosperms.
Yeah,
You said the
you wanna look at one?
angiosperms have flowers, and the flowers are what creates seeds. They create fruit, and then that creates seeds.
Yes.
So what creates the cones or the seeds in a gymnosperm?
So in a gymnosperm, the cone is the reproductive structure, and there's usually male cones and female cones.
Okay.
And you will have the female cone will kind of open up, and it'll get typically wind pollinated.
Okay.
And then they'll close up. They'll form their seeds, and cones are typically woody. They're sometimes fleshy. If you've ever seen a juniper berry, it's actually a cone. It's a fleshy cone. So they enclose and they protect the seed, which the seed needs because they're naked. They don't have any fruit around them. So if you've ever like foraged for pine nuts, you kind of open the pine cone and it's just a nut. You don't have to do anything more from there.
Okay.
How can you tell the difference between a male and a female cone?
They often look very different. So if you've ever seen like on the tips of pine trees or underneath them, there are these things that look like little cattails or like little puffy. That's a male cone. So their main purpose is to open up and to just get pollen everywhere. And
Is that like a catkin? Are they called catkins?
yes. So in gymnosperms, it's a male cone, but there are some like alders are angiosperms, but they have cones. Sorry, everybody. So they're it's actually a specialized floral structure. It's technically not a cone, but yeah, the male flowers are catkins. Yes. So we had our whole find the bud, find the leaf thing, so you can figure out if you're looking at a megaleaf, and leaf shape is a good clue for family. And then we had our flower parts of 3 means we're looking at a monocot. You guys got all this.
I'll remember all of that.
Yeah, so then I wanted to go into how we use this knowledge, and one of the like lower barrier to entry ways is to get a field guide, which is probably going to be very regionally specific, so it won't have a bunch of plants in it that you're really not likely to find in your area, which a dichotomous key will. So a dichotomous key will have this, this one basically, this is for California. It's also really useful for basically the lower 3/4 of Oregon. And so that's for a huge floral province. But a field guide will have really nice pictures, and it'll just be for like the northern Oregon coast or something specific like that. So you can go through it and you can match the plant to the picture pretty well, and then from there you can like note all of the features of the plant. Now that you know exactly what plant it is, you can kind of log all of that in your memory so that you're more likely to know in the future. Whereas a dichotomous key, it's got all those mutually exclusive conditions. You're going to figure out exactly what it is that you're looking at, but they're thick. So.
Is this juniper or is
that
cypress or?
I couldn't decide if I was going to actually try to do a really quick keying exercise so you guys can see what it's like to run through a dichotomous key.
Oh, yeah.
And we're either going to do that or one of these guys. It might.
You're at
depending on how much
23
time.
minutes.
Okay. Cool. So, kind of already went over this. Yeah, a really good note is that there will be a lot of terms, very heady terms. But if you're looking at a key, every term used in a key should be defined in the key. So, at least there's that. And yeah, do you guys want to try?
Yeah.
We can decide right now if we want to try that or if we want to have time for lots of questions. What do you guys want to do?
Do the thing.
Do the thing?
And
Do the
questions
thing.
later.
Okay, let's do the thing. And I just put this here for strength because it's pretty.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, never mind. We'll put that at the end. Okay, so let's try with these guys because it's going to be fewer steps and with limited time. So who wants to look at it? And then, okay, cool. So basically, we can't really all gather around it, but I can kind of try to hold it up storybook style. So basically, how it starts is with the key to the families. So how it's going to work is that it's got like, so the first question is specimens available for examination without flowers.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct? Alright. So that means that,
Funny way to say that.
okay, so next step, bulblets. Small bulbs in the place of seeds or flowers. It's either that or it's we don't have bulblets. What do you guys think?
Bulblets.
So basically where there would be a flower, there's like something that looks like a little onion.
Bulblets.
No onion.
Yeah, it's got cones, right? Yeah.
Cones.
So no bulblets. And
Cone boys.
then it wants to know,
That's sad now.
does it have a structure that like spores would come out of? Or does it have cones?
Oh.
Okay, so so is it herbaceous or is it tree-like?
Tree-like.
Yeah. Okay,
What exactly is herbaceous?
Yeah, what does that mean? I wasn't
good noise. Okay, herbaceous means it doesn't have wood, so it's like it's kind of flimsy. You could just pick
No,
it.
you can't
No.
smoke this
Yeah.
bread.
got
Wait, say
wood.
that. Repeat that.
That is
Herbaceous
herbaceous.
means it doesn't have wood.
Okay.
Yeah. So next question. Ovules, so basically what would become seeds, exposed to air at the time of pollination, not enclosed in the ovary, or enclosed in ovaries. Blah, 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 blah.
It's definitely closed, no.
Are we sure?
No, not sure.
Not sure.
And
it,
so
it depends upon if the cone
This
is
is
the
very
ovary,
reasonable,
which I
right?
don't know if
it is. So this is also, this is the split right here in the key is where we're deciding between gymnosperm and angiosperm.
Is there
And
any
sometimes-
going back?
So sometimes this will actually happen when you're keying, and it's sort of unfortunate. It'll suddenly start it'll ask you about the seeds, and then it'll it'll ask you about the flower, and then ask you about the fruit. And the thing is, you're not often gonna have flowers and fruits at the same time. So sometimes you have to skip ahead a couple questions and like kind of go down one path and then figure out it's wrong and double back because
So you can go back.
you can't
Cool.
go back. It's true.
So what you're saying is that
Will you
book is a
repeat
labyrinth.
the criteria for that one?
Yeah. So it's basically.
Enclosed.
Yeah, is the cone going to open up and get wind pollinated, or is it fully enclosed in an ovary?
Windy.
I think it's
Wind
windy.
pollen.
I think it's windy too. It's all.
Windy.
It's open.
It's open.
So then we go to page 75.
Watch out.
Three amigos.
All right. So then, are you guys still into this?
Yes.
Yes! Oh my god.
Okay. Question 1: specimens with pollen-producing cones only, no seed-producing structures unavailable, or specimens with seed-producing structures only, pollen-producing cones absent. So basically, this knows that when you're looking at a specimen, it's probably going to have one or the other. So it's got two keys. So we've got seed-producing structures. I'll just give you guys that one.
Thank you.
Thanks for us.
All right. Next question: is it a cone that becomes more or less woody at maturity, or are the seeds exposed on the branches?
These are woody.
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 Cool.
Is the cone subtended by bracts? So basically, are there little like leaf-like structures that are kind of like sitting right underneath the cone and kind of like enclosing it? Cool. So we have a family.
Oh.
Family is Cupressaceae, which is the cypress family. Whoever gets that, good job.
Wow.
And I'm not sure if we're going to go all the way to species, but that's how a dichotomous key works, unless you guys want to. But yeah, I had some extra stuff here if you guys wanted to look at it. It's just like cool examples of what a plant can be like. This is from South America. It's an acacia, and these are like the most divided leaves you will ever see. They look like little feathers, and it's got little pom-poms on it, so you guys can look at those during the
So
break.
each feather is one leaf on ours?
No,
No.
they're leaflets.
The whole thing is a
But look
leaf.
in the pit, dude.
The whole
Okay, so I can't see the
Yeah.
pit. Where's your loop?
Yeah. Get in the pit.
So, final thing, helpful resources. The library has the organ, the really good giant key for organ. Thrift stores are surprisingly good for getting field guides. Allegri.com is super cheap. books, and iNaturalist is a really great app that you can take pictures of things and submit them and ask for help in identifying it, or you can look at their picture database and try to figure out what it is, and once you get better at identifying things, you can add to their database. And it's a really cool citizen science project that has been turning out some really cool data on species, range maps, and like ranges shifting with global warming and stuff. It's really cool.
Can we be friends on there?
I think so. The heart says yes. I'm not positive, but the heart says yes. And then Cal Flora and the Oregon Flora Project have huge photo databases for every plant, and that is it. Any questions?
Thank you so much.
I think we kind of got them all during the thing.
You cannot add friends.
You can't.
I looked. I was like,
Can you follow people?